Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now is often hailed as one of the greatest war films ever made, a haunting blend of surrealism, realism, and myth that continues to mesmerize audiences more than 4 decades after its release. Based loosely on Joseph Conrad's 1899 novella Heart of Darkness, the film transposes Conrad's exploration of colonialism into the Vietnam War, creating a meditation not simply on warfare, but on the darkest recesses of human nature, the collapse of moral order, and the terrifying thinness of civilization itself. At nearly 3 hours in its original theatrical cut, and longer in the Redux and Final Cut versions, Apocalypse Now is not a typical war movie. It is less about battles than about the psychological descent of its characters. It is a hallucinatory journey upriver and inward, a film that uses Vietnam not as a historical study but as a mythic landscape where order dissolves into chaos. In this review, I will explore the film's production background, narrative structure, performances, cinematography, thematic depth, and cultural legacy, before considering its enduring relevance as both a war film and a work of art. Few films have as storied and troubled a production history as Apocalypse Now. The screenplay was originally drafted in the late 1960s by John Milius, who imagined it as a modern retelling of Heart of Darkness. Initially, director George Lucas was attached to make it as a small guerrilla-style film set in contemporary Vietnam. When Lucas turned to Star Wars, Coppola took over, transforming the project into a massive and ambitious epic. The production in the Philippines was plagued by disaster. A typhoon destroyed sets, star Martin Sheen suffered a near-fatal heart attack, and Marlon Brando arrived overweight, unprepared, and unwilling to follow the script. Coppola famously invested much of his own fortune, at one point declaring, "We were in the jungle, there were too many of us, we had access to too much money, too much equipment, and little by little we went insane." That chaos bled into the film itself, giving it the authenticity of a cinematic fever dream. The film premiered in 1979 at Cannes, unfinished and in rough cut, yet won the Palme d'Or. Its theatrical release later that year cemented Coppola's reputation as one of cinema's great auteurs. The film opens with an iconic montage, helicopters drifting across the jungle, flames erupting, and The Doors' The End playing on the soundtrack. This sequence sets the tone, apocalyptic, surreal, psychedelic. We meet Captain Benjamin Willard, Martin Sheen, a battle-weary officer adrift in Saigon, consumed by despair and waiting for another mission. His orders arrive: travel upriver into Cambodia to terminate with extreme prejudice. Colonel Walter E. Kurtz, Marlon Brando, a highly decorated officer who has gone rogue and set himself up as a demigod among local tribes. Willard's journey upriver aboard a Navy patrol boat with a motley crew: Chef Frederick Forrest, Clean, a young Lawrence Fishburne, Lance, Sam Bottoms, and Chief Phillips, Albert Hall, becomes the spine of the narrative. Along the way they encounter surreal episodes: the flamboyant Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore, Robert Duvall, leading a helicopter assault while blasting Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries, a USO show where Playboy bunnies are paraded before desperate soldiers, a foggy river ambush, and the gradual unraveling of sanity. When they finally reach Kurtz's compound, Willard finds a nightmare kingdom where order has collapsed, bodies are strewn about, and Kurtz presides like a dark philosopher king. Their confrontation is less a traditional climax than a symbolic encounter between civilization and madness, with Willard ultimately carrying out his mission in a ritualistic act of violence that parallels both assassination and sacrifice. The cast of Apocalypse Now is one of its greatest strengths. Martin Sheen as Captain Willard. Sheen gives a haunting performance, subtle and restrained. His Willard is less a traditional hero than a cipher, a man hollowed out by war, observing the chaos with weary detachment. Sheen's quiet voice-over narration adds layers of irony, reflection, and dread. Marlon Brando as Colonel Kurtz. Though his role is brief and shrouded in shadow, Brando dominates the film's final act. His improvisational dialogue, rambling, poetic, sometimes incomprehensible, captures Kurtz as both terrifying and magnetic, a man who has glimpsed the horror at the core of humanity and embraced it. Robert Duvall as Kilgore. Duvall's Kilgore is unforgettable, bombastic, fearless, eccentric, declaring that, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning." Both comic and chilling, Kilgore embodies the absurdity of war's spectacle. Supporting cast: a young Lawrence Fishburne, only 14 at the time of filming, though playing 17, as Clean radiates youthful energy that makes his death tragic. Sam Bottoms as Lance descends into psychedelic detachment, while Albert Hall's Chief Phillips represents discipline, clashing with Willard's ambiguous morality. Cinematographer Vittorio Storaro's work is essential to the film's dreamlike quality. His use of shadows, silhouettes, and saturated colors turns the Vietnamese jungle into a hallucinatory landscape. The film transitions from sun-drenched battlefields to foggy, oppressive riversides, culminating in the surreal chiaroscuro of Kurtz's temple. Sound design is equally groundbreaking. Helicopter blades merge with the whir of ceiling fans, music blends with ambient jungle noise, and the Doors' haunting music anchors the film in its late 1960s countercultural moment. Coppola and sound designer Walter Murch pioneered techniques that created an immersive, almost overwhelming auditory experience. 1. The descent into madness. Like Conrad's novella, Apocalypse Now is a meditation on how thin the veneer of civilization is. Willard's journey upriver mirrors a descent into primal chaos, each stage stripping away order until only raw brutality remains. 2. The horror of war. Rather than glorify combat, the film portrays it as absurd, destructive, and surreal. Kilgore's surfing obsession amid carnage epitomizes the disconnection between violence and humanity. 3. Colonialism and imperialism. By adapting Heart of Darkness, Coppola suggests that Vietnam, like Africa in Conrad's time, became a theater where Western powers projected their dominance, only to confront their own moral bankruptcy. 4. Duality of man. Willard and Kurtz are mirrors. Willard is sent to kill Kurtz, yet he understands him deeply, recognizing in Kurtz the truths that frighten civilized society, that war requires inhuman ruthlessness, and that those who accept the horror are both monstrous and honest. 5. Myth and ritual. The film is filled with ritualistic imagery, sacrifices, tribal ceremonies, and the final assassination staged alongside the slaughter of a water buffalo. This elevates the narrative from war story to mythic allegory. Upon release, Apocalypse Now was divisive. Some critics hailed it as a masterpiece, others found it indulgent and incoherent. Over time, however, its reputation solidified. Today, it is regarded as one of the definitive Vietnam War films, alongside Platoon and Full Metal Jacket. Its cultural influence is enormous. Parodies and homages appear in everything from The Simpsons to Call of Duty. Duvall's Napalm line is among the most quoted in film history. The movie's blending of surrealism and realism influenced generations of filmmakers. Importantly, the film refrains from political preaching. It neither defends nor condemns U.S. involvement explicitly. Instead, it presents war as a human catastrophe, a descent into irrationality. In doing so, it transcends Vietnam and becomes a meditation on violence itself. Over the decades, Coppola revisited the film multiple times. The Redux version, 2001, added nearly 50 minutes of footage, including the French plantation sequence, which emphasized colonial themes. The final cut, 2019, offered a middle ground, streamlining some of the excesses of Redux while expanding beyond the theatrical cut. Each version reveals new layers. The theatrical cut is leaner and more enigmatic. Redux is sprawling and thematic. Final cut balances myth and coherence. Together, they underscore the film's reputation as a living work of art, always open to reinterpretation. More than 40 years after its release, Apocalypse Now feels timeless. In an era still marked by wars, interventions, and debates over power, the film's exploration of violence and morality remains chillingly pertinent. Its imagery, the helicopters swooping to Wagner, the surreal play of shadows on Brando's face, the haunting phrase, the horror, continues to resonate in popular culture. It is also a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition, both Coppola's ambition as a filmmaker and Kurtz's as a soldier. That the film survived its chaotic production and emerged as a masterpiece is itself almost miraculous.